Welcome back, Capital F football fans, to the O&O Sports YouTube channel. Today we are looking at Rivalry Week, arguably the best week of the year. So many great matchups this week, but before we get into those, be sure to hit like and subscribe. It helps me out a ton. And go to the other O&O Sports accounts to be entered into the 75 or die giveaway challenge. The rules of that will be on the screen, but basically if I go under 75% correct predictions this year, you get an opportunity to win $100, and if I go over 75%, you still get a chance at 50. Right now I'm at like 74.5, so this week is going to be crucial for the total number of dollars you are able to win. But either way, be sure to go ahead and get entered into that. Links to those will be in the description below. And let's get this week started with some clean, old-fashioned hate. It is Georgia Tech taking on Georgia. The Bulldogs are a 12.5 point favorite, which means FanDuel has them winning at about 35-23. And last week we saw Georgia Tech get absolutely gashed on the ground versus Pitt, which doesn't lend me a ton of confidence for them coming into this matchup. But against the Bulldogs, if Georgia Tech can force a shootout in this matchup, they actually stand a pretty fair chance, as they have all year long in these kinds of matchups. We saw it work for Tennessee earlier on in the season. Now I know that was like 7 years ago at this point, or at least it feels like it, but still, Georgia Tech does have a road to victory if they can force that kind of matchup in this one. But whatever happens, they cannot afford to go down big early. We saw it last week when Haynes King is forced to pass the ball. Isn't the greatest. You would love for him to have that time, really be able to establish the run game before he starts airing it out. They need that explosive rushing upside for Haynes King to be truly successful. And at times, when they've been able to do that this year, Haynes King has looked like a Heisman candidate. And on top of that, last year, they were able to go blow for blow, like I said, force that shootout against Georgia, and they ended up almost beating them in 8 overtime, so it is very, very possible. But Georgia is almost a completely different story this year than they were last year. Last year, they did not have a ton of success running the ball, and their defense was iffy at best. This year, the defense has improved a ton down the stretch, and in my opinion, the ground game will tell the story in this matchup. Georgia is 38th in rushing yards per attempt, have two great backs in Chauncey Bowens and Nate Frazier, who both give you a different set of advantages. But Georgia Tech just 111th in rushing yards allowed per attempt, and that is to say, I think Georgia has a pretty good amount of success running the ball, which sets up Gunnar Stockton to make some big plays with his arm. I have Georgia winning and covering in this matchup, 35-20. And next, it is the Lone Star Showdown. 16th ranked Texas taking on 3rd ranked Texas A&M. A&M is a 2.5 point favorite, which means FanDuel has them winning at about 27-24 in Austin. And once again, I have the hardest job in college football, and that is trying to predict Texas football. It has just been impossible this year. And likewise, Texas A&M has also been pretty hard to predict. So I am going to have a ton of fun going over this one. For Texas, the goal should be to protect Arch Manning. Now I know that's been the goal all year and they haven't been able to do it, but they really need to figure it out here because A&M is 2nd in the country in sacks per game. And we've seen it. When Arch Manning is off his game, that offense looks anemic. Go back to the Georgia game if you do not believe me. Have to keep him on his feet and working throughout that secondary if they want to win this matchup. And likewise for A&M, they also need to protect Marcel Reed. Now they do have a much better ground game to kind of take the pressure off of Marcel Reed's shoulders, but Texas has been elite at stopping the run this year, so still going to need to protect him when he drops back. And that is going to be a tall order to ask for because Texas is also very good at getting pressure on the quarterback. They are 6th in sacks this year, and plus Anthony Hill Jr. misses last week but returns this week, another key contributor on that defense. They have elite playmakers all over the field, but their one biggest weakness this year has been stopping the pass. They're 83rd in opponent completion percentage and 49th in yards allowed per pass attempt so far this year. And best believe Marcel Reed knows that. He's going to have a fun day airing it out if you give him time in the pocket. So for Texas, you have to figure out a way to get him on the ground or else he will punish you with his arm. And all that is to say, Marcel Reed is going to be the X factor in this matchup. If he plays like he did in the first half of the South Carolina game, the Aggies might be in trouble, but I don't necessarily think that'll happen. I think they'll be able to roll him out, naturally get that pressure kind of away from him, and still be able to win on the perimeter. Plus, Texas A&M is going to get a couple gut punches in on the ground on this one to take the pressure off his shoulders. I like both defenses to have strong performances in this matchup. I think the under does hit, but ultimately I have Texas A&M winning 24-20. And next in this video, in the Big Ten, what other game than the game would we be going over? It is 15th ranked Michigan taking on the #1 team in the country, the Ohio State Buckeyes. Ohio State is a 9.5 point favorite on the road, which means FanDuel has them winning at about 27-17. And coming into Saturday, we will be quickly approaching 2,200 days since Ohio State last beat Michigan. And if Michigan wins, we will get to 2,200 days and beyond. And last year, as we know, Ryan Day and company were absolutely embarrassed by Michigan in Columbus in the shoe nonetheless. And this year they're facing an overall much better Michigan team, which isn't very fun to hear if you are a Buckeye. On offense, Bryce Underwood hasn't been elite by any stretch, but he's been much better than what they had last year. And on top of just generally okay arm talent, he also has great talent with his legs, which is tough to game plan for in these kinds of matchups. And once again, they have an elite defense, elite offensive line, and an elite running back room and ground game overall. But despite all of that, Ohio State still matches up very well against Michigan. But in my opinion, that is not what matters. The matchup advantages, the matchup disadvantages aren't the story to tell in this matchup. Last year, Ohio State matched up very well with Michigan. Michigan was not very good at all, and Ohio State was elite. They ended up winning the national championship. But coming into this matchup, Ryan Day underestimated them. He wanted to come into that matchup, walk all over them, walk out of the shoe, and head to the Big Ten title game. And in that, Ohio State did not show up ready for war. Both teams were held under 500 total yards combined. Both defenses were able to force turnovers in that matchup, but Michigan won on the ground, was able to control the pace of the game, and had Ohio State up against a wall at home. And that forced Ohio State to kind of play off their heels. They weren't ready for that kind of matchup. They just wanted to walk in, be the Ohio State we saw in the previous 11 games, like I said, and go home with a 49-10 win over an inferior opponent. But that is just not how these matchups work. It's going to be an absolute rock fight, and they have to be ready for that in this matchup. I personally think they will be, seeing as last year they did such a terrible job. But the expectation here is that they have to be. And with that, for Michigan, all you have to do is line up, run the ball 35 to 40 times again in this matchup. Sprinkle in the Bryce Underwood quarterback run to keep the Ohio State defense honest, and roll him out on third down. Try and find a perimeter matchup that you like, although that Ohio State secondary is very good, and you have just as good a chance to win this game as you have the past 4 years. And for Ohio State, essentially the same thing. Embrace this matchup for what it is. Don't come into it expecting Julian Sain to pass the ball 30 times, have an 80% completion percentage with 400 yards and 4 touchdowns. That's just not going to happen in this matchup. Embrace the game for what it is. Run the ball. Don't be reckless with it. Don't turn it over. And when that starts clicking, then you can air it out to Jeremiah Smith, Carnell Tate. Win on the perimeter, you're going to be able to do that, but not if you're turning the ball over and allowing Michigan to run all over you and having to play from behind in this matchup. I am expecting Ohio State to embrace this matchup tenfold from what we saw last year, and then when we get down the stretch in the third and fourth quarter, be able to win on the perimeter with those elite wide receivers. I have Ohio State finally winning this matchup 23-17. And jumping back to the SEC, we have to talk about 18th ranked Tennessee taking on 12th ranked Vanderbilt. Tennessee is a 2.5 point favorite at home, which means FanDuel has them winning at about 34-31. And this is one of my personal favorite matchups this week, not just because it's a rivalry, but because these teams are almost polar opposites from each other. Tennessee is the huge brand. Vanderbilt's kind of the underdog brand who's only gotten good the past couple years. Tennessee's going to play tempo and strike quickly, whereas Vanderbilt is going to churn out drives, control the pace with their elite rushing offense. And honestly, honestly, I think who wins this matchup is who exactly is more successful in their offensive approach, because neither of these defenses have been particularly elite or even great this season. So if we get into the third quarter and Tennessee is being destroyed in time of possession, Vanderbilt's running all over them and they have no real answer and are down like 7 to 10 points, this is Vanderbilt's matchup to win. But if Tennessee is able to strike quickly, get out to early leads, force Vanderbilt to take big shots, I think this is a great matchup for Tennessee. But if I'm going to lean one way or the other, I would say Tennessee's probably going to be a lot more successful just because Vanderbilt hasn't been great at stopping offenses like Tennessee's so far this season. But that isn't necessarily a clear matchup advantage, although just a lean I'm going with for the sake of this video. I honestly think this game is going to come down to two things: who wins the turnover battle, which I know a lot of matchups come down to who wins the turnover battle, and second, winning in the red zone. For Vanderbilt, that will be so crucial, and they have been so great at doing that this season. And for Tennessee, that's also crucial, although they can score from way further out on the field. They're a lot more explosive, don't need to get in the red zone to score. But in terms of that red zone efficiency, Tennessee, I think, is going to need to at least keep up, not trade 7s for 3s once you get inside the 25. And I think this ends up being an Aguilar versus a Pavia show. Pavia, one of the best quarterbacks in the country, near the top of my Heisman ladder every single week. He has been truly elite this season, but Aguilar has been very underrated. Tennessee overall has been very underrated. And in terms of matchup style, like I said, I favor Tennessee's offense in this matchup against a Vanderbilt secondary that hasn't been great. I think Aguilar has a pretty relatively clean game in this matchup, and then once they're able to spread out that Vanderbilt offense, they have a ton of success with their two borderline elite running backs in Deshaun Bishop and Star Thomas. I like a good bit of offense in this matchup, and I have the Volunteers beating the Commodores 31-27. And last in this video, what else would it be other than the Iron Bowl? Auburn versus 10th ranked Alabama. Alabama is only a touchdown favorite in this matchup, which means FanDuel has them winning at about 27-20. And I would like to start this one out by pointing out 2 weeks ago, I made the mistake of saying Alabama's rushing offense was very good. It has not been. Somehow I got them confused with Georgia. They have absolutely lived by their defense and the arm of Ty Simpson so far this season, and they will have to do it again in this matchup. And we saw 2 weeks ago that wasn't necessarily a recipe for success. Alabama dominated the stat sheet, but Oklahoma was able to force pressure on Ty Simpson. They sacked him 4 times and forced him to turn the ball over twice, and then forced another turnover in that matchup, which gave them a huge advantage. And that's really concerning, seeing as this Auburn front is on par with Oklahoma's. They're going to get pressure on Ty Simpson. They're probably going to force Ty Simpson turnovers. And in that matchup, Oklahoma didn't need to run for 200 yards. They didn't need to pass for 300. They just took what Alabama gave them, took the short fields, and ended up winning that matchup. But for Auburn, the book is out on them. They are not good. Sure, they played well against Mercer. That's an FCS school. So to me, the true Auburn offense is going to be their defense, just like Oklahoma's was. They need to force those shorter fields, force a couple of turnovers to help them generate 10 to 17 extra points in this matchup. And if they do that, which is a very real possibility, they have a great chance at winning this matchup, especially with it being at Jordan-Hare, where, like Nick Saban said, weird things just tend to happen. But what leads me to lean Alabama here is that Auburn's secondary is not as good as Oklahoma's. They allow 7.8 passing yards per attempt this year, which is much worse than Oklahoma. So while I do think, like I said, they get pressure on Ty Simpson and can force at least one turnover in this matchup, eventually I like the Alabama wide receivers to force separation, get open, and I think Ty Simpson ends up having a much better game in this matchup. Once again, I think this is a defensive slugfest like the game versus Oklahoma was for Alabama, but I have the Crimson Tide making the bigger plays at the end of this matchup and winning 24-17. And with that, thank you for watching. As always, be sure to like and subscribe if you did enjoy it. Hit the other O&O Sports social media accounts to be entered into the 75 or die giveaway challenge. Have a fantastic rivalry week, folks, and I will see you in the next one.